Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku was too powerful to control part 2. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 3, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story HalfQuetzalcoatlHunter from fanfiction. So let's start the video. The day of the outing had not gone the way that Yaoyorozu had planned. In truth, he would say that the day had literally gone to shit. And it was in no small part thanks to his daughter acting out again. Still, the situation was more than salvageable. 𝗵𝗲 had been impressed by his daughter's actions during the incident. Despite his son's baseless accusations, his daughter had endeared herself to the number 2 hero greatly, even seeming to be proud of her. She had also given their family name a great boost in popularity, as her face was now plastered all over the morning's papers and news channels alongside the 2 boys and man that had helped during the traffic accident. The following day saw him swamped with calls from rival companies asking how the girl was doing after her collapse, and offering promising business deals should the girl become a pro hero. These business deals would much more agreeable if they didn't depend on her becoming a heroine, he mused as he hung up his phone after speaking with one of his rival companies. True, his under-the-table dealings would be slightly more difficult should the girl turn pro, but they wouldn't be impossible. But her time as a professional heroine would lessen the time needed to produce an heir for the Yaoyorozu family. Though, he sighed as he remembered visiting the hospital soon after her collapse. If she sees how dangerous overusing her quirk is, then perhaps she will give up this dream of hers. Momo Yaoyorozu had fainted due to her quirk using her lipids to create medical supplies for the wounded. Doing so had caused her glucose levels to plummet, shutting down her body as it fell into a hypoglycemic coma. To add to the insult of his daughter falling ill because of her recklessness, an absolute urchin of a boy had laid hands on her and carried her to one of the ambulances. It was absolutely outrageous. Had he not been in public, he would admonish the boy for daring to touch his daughter. However, he couldn't show his less favorable side to the press. He would lose the image he had built up for himself since his quirk manifested. A knock came from the door of his home office. "Sir?" It was one of the servants. "Your 3:30 appointment is here." He gave a nod. "Send him in." A few minutes later, the door was opened by one of the servants, permitting a rather round man to enter the room. He was dressed rather finely in a black suit and fedora hat with a yellow tie around his neck which matched the odd gear-shaped goggle-like glasses on his face. He tipped his hat to him as he was halfway across the room. "Good to see you again, 𝐿, the man said in a jovial tone. "How go your business ventures?" 𝐿 nodded in return. "Very well, in fact, old friend," he said while the man sat down in the chair in front of his desk. "But I'm glad that you could take the time out of your busy schedule to humor my request." "Not at all," the man smiled. "Think of this as a house call if you wish." His smile became impossibly wide. "After all, did you not request my aid with something not so long ago?" If his words bothered the entrepreneur, he didn't show it. Instead, the man just smirked. "Indeed, and I still thank you for your help in that venture, even if the final product wasn't exactly what we desired," he said with a small chuckle. "I actually called you here to see if you would be interested in something that recently came to my attention." "Oh." The rotund man smirked. "It's rare that you find something that might interest someone like myself, 𝐿, old as I am," he chuckled. "But given that you are not one for flights of whimsy, I'd like to believe you might have found something truly interesting." He gave a short nod. "As you know, I've had ties with one of the last remaining Yakuza groups left in Japan," he started while the man gave him a look of befuddlement. "Yes, I know that they're a dying breed, this cell possibly being the last of its kind. Yet the young leader has been a most lucrative business partner when it comes to, shall we say, special products? A trigger dealer, ah?" The man guessed with a laugh. "I see now why it's been on the rise on the streets," he said with glee. "I'm glad it's you that I have to thank for the added business when those fools eventually overdose and need my particular skills to stay alive." He laced his fingers together. "But I feel that this Yakuza group is offering more than just quirk enhancement drugs, or else you wouldn't feel the need to have me come here in person." 𝐿 nodded pleasantly. "Right again, my old friend," he said. "The young leader came to me not long ago with something that I think could solve many problems for both of us," he continued and leaned forward. "A drug that is capable of erasing a person's quirk." The man's glasses flashed, revealing narrowed eyes behind them. "Oh? Truly something that I've never heard of," the man said with his ever-present grin. "Do go on." I don't know much, Isshin told him with a sigh. The enzyme he uses for the drug is harvested from a child, you see? He leaned back, feeling slightly sick to his stomach, and Chisaki's quirk allows him to harvest as much as he needs without killing the child, not permanently at least. That's not Kai Chisaki, is it? The man asked with interest. Isshin nodded. You know him? Know of him, the man corrected. His quirk has been an interest of mine ever since it popped up on the radar, he explained, and you know very well how much a rare and unique quirk means to me in my research, no? Which is why I decided to come to you with this situation, Isshin explained with a nod. I do not like this man, Dr. Garaki, he shook his head disdainfully. In truth, I despise him. His predecessor was far better to deal with than he is. He made a dismissive gesture. Bah, I don't want to bore you with the details, but this new drug seems like something worth investing in, provided, he gave the man a look, that you think you can perfect the drug into making the effects permanent. The now-named Garaki chuckled deeply. Now we come to the meat of the conversation, he said, sitting back to lace his fingers together. I won't lie and say that this doesn't interest me, Mr. Yaoyorozu, but there are risks that involve myself and my benefactor. Though, in this case, I believe the potential payoff may be worth it. I think it will be, old friend, Isshin said. As you know, if a drug like that existed, then there would be a need for a cure of a sorts for those that have been affected by the drug. And I would have the chance to harvest from the source of the drug, Garaki smiled, and from Chisaki himself, whose quirk could be just as valuable as this child seems to be. Isshin spread his hands out widely. And I, as the supporter of your hospital, would gain significant profits when your people miraculously find the cure for this horrible drug. He smiled just as widely. So what do you say, doctor? Garaki chuckled and held out his hand. I say that a deal with the devil is never without rewards. He chuckled as Isshin reached out and sealed the deal. 𝐒𝐻 Dagoba Municipal Beach/illegal dumping ground. Toshinori was watching his two students with a keen eye as the two of them continued cleaning the beach and returning it to its former glory. It had been a few days since the incident involving the car pileup had happened, and it had seen a change in one of the boys. Izuku Midoriya was a boy that wore his heat on his sleeve, no matter the situation. There were two things that Toshinori was certain of. The first was that the encounter had left its mark on the boy. When he had taken the boys home after the incident, he spent an hour with the families to make certain that they were all well taken care of. Izuku had spent a long time in the bathroom, and when his aunt had checked on him, it was to find him furiously scrubbing his hands. The blood won't come off, was his answer when they questioned him. It was a familiar scene that the blonde man had dealt with when concerning new heroes when they finally got their hands dirty. It had taken some doing, but they had managed to calm him down and convince him that there was no longer any blood on his hands. The second was something much less easy to deal with. Toshinori was quite certain that whatever was occupying the boy's mind at the moment had everything to do with the third member of their rescue work. To be young, Toshinori muttered with amusement as the boys finished loading his truck. He checked his watch and saw that it was close to their allotted quitting time. All right, boys, let's drop this load off and call it a day. Izuku and Katsuki all but collapsed when they heard his call, which caused him to laugh. Am I working you boys too hard? He teased as the two of them groaned, Katsuki mustering up the energy to flip him the bird. Well, why don't I treat you two to dinner? I think you've earned that much at least. No burgers or pizzas this time, the ashen blonde groaned. I want hot wings. Izuku groaned right next to him. You can have the hot wings, I'll take barbecue, the boy said as he staggered to his feet. Toshinori smiled as that started up another argument between the two while they loaded up into his truck. Izuku, being the smaller of the two, was in the middle while the blonde took up the window seat. Both of them were already beginning to show progress, Izuku more than his friend since Katsuki was always training in some way. And while Izuku's former routine kept him decently fit, he was still a bit of a beanpole. Still, progress was progress. Izuku, my boy, Toshinori said as he started the truck and began the drive. Is there something troubling you? He asked, deciding to broach the subject of the boy's behavior of late. I've noticed that you've been thinking quite a bit lately, more than usual, I mean. Izuku looked at him and blushed, all but confirming the man's suspicions. Katsuki was the one that gave him the final blow. He's been hung up on that ponytailed girl since she passed out on us, the blonde boy said, earning a glare from his friend. Oh, don't give me that fucking look, nerd. You know it's true. Toshinori just laughed while the boy fumed. It's nothing to be ashamed of, young Midoriya, the the man said as the boy just continued to blush. "She was quite a lovely young woman." "It's not that." The boy frowned with a shake of his head. "I'm worried about her," he admitted with a little embarrassment. "Mom works at the hospital she was taken to, and she says that she still hasn't woken up." "They haven't woken her up because she overused her quirk," Toshinori pointed out before gesturing to himself. "You don't want her to end up looking like me, do you?" he asked with a small chuckle. Toshinori, as was said before, was a tall, skeletal, thin man with black scara, a clear sign that he had used his quirk beyond his body's capabilities. Whatever the quirk was, Izuku hadn't gotten around to asking about it yet. "They'll wake her up when they think she's had ample rest and recovered enough. Some of the best doctors that have healing-type quirks work at that same hospital after all." Izuku nodded. "I guess so." He sighed while the blonde man came up with an idea. "Why don't we drop by for a visit after we eat?" he proposed, making the boy look up at him. "I'm being serious, young Midoriya. If you want to, we can go see how she's doing." Izuku then gave a grin and nodded, almost throwing his glasses off. "𝐒𝐻EMIN. Shizuoka Hospital. Recovery Ward." Momo opened her eyes slowly, her head pounding as though she had overslept. "What?" she mumbled, her mouth feeling dry as she looked around the room she was in, clearly not her own given that it appeared to be a hospital room. Then she began to remember what had happened, the accident, helping the wounded with her quirk and overusing it to the point that she had passed out. She laid back against the pillow with a groan. "Oh, father is going to kill me for this," she said, not knowing how she would explain herself. The heiress of the Yaoyorozu family, covered in street grime and blood as she passed out in the street from quirk exhaustion, he would probably lock her in her room and throw away the key. She was interrupted from her thoughts as the door to her room came open, revealing a rather petite nurse with chin-length green hair tied up in a bun behind her head. She smiled warmly at the girl as she came into the room. "I'm so glad to see you awake, dear," she said pleasantly whilst she began to check the girl's vitals and the four running to her arm. "I have some standard questions I need to ask," she said. "May I have your name and date of birth?" "I'm Momo Yaoyorozu, and I was born on the 23rd of September of the year 2XXX," she said with a small smile, "and the last thing I remember was passing out after helping with a vehicle pileup." The nurse smiled at her, looking familiar for some reason. "Good, there doesn't seem to be any defects with your memory," she said. "You were in a hypoglycemic coma for 2 days. The news surprised her greatly. There's no need to worry, my dear. Your scara haven't been damaged due to overusing your quirk, but it was very close, Miss Yaoyorozu." Momo worried her lip, thankful that she had avoided such a thing, or else her father would be even more furious with her. Has my father?" She trailed off quietly. The nurse smiled. "I doubt that you have to worry," she said as if reading her mind. "You've been labeled as quite the young heroine, my dear." She sat on the edge of her bed. The news hasn't stopped talking about the beautiful young woman that worked herself nearly to death in the middle of a car crash. Momo's cheeks began to heat up a little, "and several of the people involved in that crash have asked about you, wishing you well." She gestured to the table beside her bed where several slightly wilted vases of flowers were sitting. The sight made her feel a rush of happiness. "I don't believe anyone could feel displeased with you right now, dear," the nurse said before she rose and went about tidying up the room and helping her to sit up. "You don't know my father," the girl thought sadly. As if reading her mind again, the nurse reached over and gave her hand a comforting squeeze, a gesture that she appreciated. Another knock came to the door, and a familiar head of blonde hair poked inside. My, you've woken up," Toshinori Yagi said with obvious delight as he stepped into the room while a figure darted in behind him with a yelp. The nurse chuckled. "Ugh, dear, we can see you back there," she said as a trembling mop of green/black hair quivered behind the tall blonde. Momo was delighted as the same boy she had observed at UA and almost met at the beach stepped tentatively out from behind the man, holding a bouquet of daffodils, her favorite flower. Even compared to the ruby quartz of his glasses, she could see his cheeks were a near blinding shade of red while he was trembling like a phone set to blonde. Man seemed to take pity on the boy and stepped forward. "We were all quite worried about you, my dear," Toshinori said with a smile. "Poor Izuku here nearly had a heart attack when he caught you and carried you over to the ambulance." Izuku almost stepped on the man's foot, but Toshinori was expecting it and sidestepped it before he could connect. The girl's blush returned to a slightly darker shade. "Thank you for helping me," she mumbled. "𝐒𝐩𝐢𝐵 𝐔𝐬𝐵 The boy stammered out nervously. Momo found it extremely adorable. He stepped forward stiffly and offered her the bouquet. These are for you. Momo took the flowers and inhaled their lovely scent. They're beautiful, she breathed out. I can't wait to press one of them, she said fondly as she thought about adding one of her favorite flowers to her pressed collection. The nurse, the boy's mother, apparently, giggled and turned to leave. I need to have the staff notify your father, she said, giving a subtle glance at the blonde. 𝐒𝐻𝐿, dear, would you keep her company while I do that? The boy gulped as Tashinori followed his mother out of the room, giving him a thumbs up as he went. Momo giggled at their little play at matchmaking. If only it were that simple for me, she thought sadly. While she thought that the boy was exceedingly cute, she knew that her father would never approve of her even entertaining the idea of dating someone that he didn't choose for her himself. Still, though, she smiled slightly. It would be nice if we could be friends when we go to UA together. So, the girl started timidly. Your name is Izuku? Izuku gave a small nod. Izuku Midoriya. He bowed his head politely. And I'm Momo. The girl smiled at him over her flowers. Momo Yaoyorozu. It's very nice to meet you, Midoriya. Outside the room stood Katsuki with his hands jammed into his pockets, a slight smirk on his face. Damned idiot. 𝗧𝗵𝗵. I'm quite disappointed that the meeting did not go as planned, Yaoyorozu said to his daughter a few days later, as they were on their way home just after she was discharged from the hospital. The man looked down his nose at the girl sitting across from him. And I want an explanation on how you conducted yourself, young lady. You blatantly ignored me when I called out to you the day of the crash, and your insubordination during the incident was obviously unacceptable. Momo kept her face blank, clutching a slightly withered daffodil in her hand. Truthfully, father, the girl said, when it all happened, all I remember about it was my body moving on its own. She told him, her father raising his brow at her. I just moved. I didn't want to ignore you. I just couldn't hear you. She looked down at her lap. It was like I was hearing things as if I was underwater. Adrenaline, most likely, her father reasoned. Very well, you are forgiven, considering your heroics added to our family's fame, he said before a deep frown came to his face. Now let us speak of the Todoroki boy and his accusations toward us. Momo nodded. I don't think I've ever felt more insulted in all of my life, she admitted, remembering how the boy had asked if her family had staged the entire scene out like a play. Her father was nodding in understanding. I know how you feel, my dear, he responded darkly. The boy has fallen in my graces, and I attempted to have the engagement broken off. Her eyes showed the barest hint of emotion as she heard him say that, however. She squashed them down as the man waved his hand in dismissal. However, the boy's father doubled the money promised upon your marriage, so I could not refuse him, he said, not noticing the girl's eyes sodden. He has also insisted that the boy make an apology to you through some form of night out, he said as the limousine began to slow. In essence, he has arranged for the two of you to go on a date. Momo adopted her most dignified pose. I'm not sure I can resist the urge to slap him, she relented honestly. It's one thing to be paranoid, but to think that we would sink so low as to staging such a horrendous accident. Yes, I know, but you must remain patient, her father said. Remember, this is just as much for your benefit as it is the family's. Momo gave her father her best closed-eye smile at his attempt to gaslight her. I know, father, and I will do my level best to remain civil with him, she promised, tongue-in-cheek, before leaning on her hand as she looked out the window. But it will take restraint. He will most likely attempt to rile me again. Indeed, but Endeavor has ensured that he will not attempt to shame our family name again, the man said with a chuckle. The boy's defiance has cost him quite a bit. Momo's eyes narrowed as he spoke. Endeavor must have beaten him, she surmised as she remained quiet. Her distaste for the Todoroki family as a whole was growing by the day. How is he planning to treat me if I'm to enter into this family? Her father must have caught something in her face as the man leaned forward. Endeavor will not lay a hand on you, daughter of mine, he promised her. We both need you hale and healthy to produce our family's heirs, and if he harms you in any way, shape or form, I have all that I need to destroy him. Momo nodded, pleased by that at the very least. As you say, father. Good. Now, onto something a tad more enjoyable, he said as the girl looked at him, as you will still be attending UA under not only Endeavor's endorsements, but also All Might's as well. All Might. Momo blurted out in shock, causing the man slight amusement. Forgive me, father. But when and how did that happen? The man chuckled. That man, the blonde fellow that was helping with the accident, was actually All Might's top agent for his company, he said. And not a day later I received a call from Nizu stating that All Might had signed on your recommendation forms under Toshinori Yagi's suggestion. Her heart began to swell in her chest with joy. Toshinori was the man at the beach during the accident, and at the hospital the other day. The girl mused happily, though it didn't appear that he'd given Izuku the visor. The thought saddened her slightly that she hadn't gotten to see how the boy would look with the piece of support gear on. But perhaps. She shook her head, taking what happiness that she could get. With All Might endorsing her as well, there was no way that her father could revoke her entry into UA because now the eyes of the world and the heroic society would be on her to see what she could accomplish. It wasn't every day that someone was recommended to UA under the endorsement of the top 2 heroes of the country, and the #1 ranking hero of the world at that. I'll have my freedom, she thought smilingly as they pulled into their driveway. I can finally get away from this place and live. 𝐒𝐻 After meeting Momo Yaoyorozu, the days counting down to the UA entrance exams flew by as Izuku and Katsuki continued their training and cleaning of the beach. 1 month before the exams took place, Izuku was given a visor that Toshinori said was from someone special in their R&D department at Might Towers. Izuku loved the gift immediately, and was allowed to practice with his quirk and allow himself to grow accustomed to how he could fire off his optic blast with the press of a button. Then, after 10 long months of absolute hell, the boys finished cleaning the beach with a full month to spare. Toshinori arrived one morning to their little training ground to find them both standing up on top of the last remaining pile of garbage with their hands raised in All Might's signature victory pose, shouting at the top of their lungs. They had not only cleaned the designated stretch of the beach he had laid out for them, but beyond it as well. They had gone beyond and become plus ultra. Survival of the fittest. Gates of UA Academy. The day of the entrance exams arrived like an enraged bull for the 2 boys as they stood outside the gates of the massive academy once again with their families in attendance. Though it was not explained how, Toshinori had managed to convince the principal to allow the parents of the 2 prospective students to observe the practical part of the exam. Now that their children were no longer in danger, the parents could take the school in, its sheer size larger than any school in the country. This is so exciting. 𝐒𝐭 smiled tearfully as Mitsuki handed her a tissue from her purse. I can't believe my baby's going to attend such a prestigious school. She blubbered proudly. Izuku smiled at her. I still have to pass the exams, Mom, he reminded her, earning a scoff from his blonde friend. Listen, Marun. You miss even one question on the written part, I'm kicking your ass from one end of the country to the other. He snapped. We've been through way too much get a single thing wrong. Ever the perfectionist. Ever since they were kids, Katsuki had always strived for nothing short of perfection. Even if his aggressive attitude was a huge black mark on that score. Mitsuki just rolled her eyes at the boy. All that money spent on therapy and he still can't be nice for 2 seconds. She bemoaned to her husband, who patted her shoulder comfortingly. Toshinori just chuckled at the family's antics. I'm quite certain that you boys will do just fine, he said to the pair. You're right about one thing, young Bakugo. You've both gone through quite a lot these last few months, and I couldn't be prouder of either of you as your instructor. Izuku blushed beneath his shades. We owe you a lot for what you've done for us, the boy said while Bakugo remained quiet. Though he was just as grateful for the training as Izuku was, he would never admit it. You don't owe me a thing, boys, he smiled proudly. You 2 have earned your places here, he stated as he ushered the 2 of them toward the school. You just need to take the last step and show the faculty what you can really do, he said before looking at the freckled boy. That reminds me, young Midoriya, I pulled some strings with Nizu and got you permission to use the visor I gave you, he said as the boy beamed happily at him. Now you shouldn't have to worry about dropping your shades when firing your blasts. 𝐒𝐭 clapped her hands together. How thoughtful of you, Toshinori, she gushed. I always worry that his hands will slip when he uses his quirk. Mitsuki grinned at her friend. Since when is he, Toshinori, 𝐒𝐭? She asked, knowing that the woman had grown fond of the skeletal hero agent during their interactions when training the boys. The woman giggled at her friend as she turned several shades of red while the blonde man in question cleared his throat. Ahem, would you folks care to see the dorms your boys will be staying in when you're enrolled? The blonde asked, hoping to change the subject. 𝐒𝐭 smiled at him. I certainly wouldn't mind seeing where my boy will be living, she said with a small look toward the school. But shouldn't the boys be heading in to take their tests? She asked while looking down at her phone. It's almost time, isn't it? Izuku nodded and turned to Katsuki. She's right, we'd better get inside so we won't miss anything. Katsuki scoffed, like we're gonna miss anything important. He sighed as the pair of them started toward the school entrance. Mitsuki smiled at them. They've come so far, she sighed tearfully. I never expected them to make it this far. Katsuki's come a lot farther than you think. Inko smiled, shaking her head slightly. Sure, he's still a little aggressive, but he's been doing so much better. Masaru nodded in agreement. I think we have Mr. Yagi to thank for a large part of it, he said with a nod of thanks toward the man. Toshinori just chuckled and rubbed the back of his neck bashfully. I didn't really do that much, he said with a blush. Young Bakugo was already well disciplined. All I really did was fine-tune a few things along with his muscles training. He's not as loud as he used to be, Mitsuki pointed out. Sure, he's still obnoxious and way too proud, but he's a lot less aggressive around people. Inko smiled as Toshinori steered them toward the dormitories. He's come to truly regret what he did to Izuku Mitsuki, she told her friend with a small sigh. Even if Izuku will never be able to control his optic blast, I think it's time you stopped blaming Katsuki for what others put him up to. Mitsuki looked like she wanted to argue, but pressed her lips into a hard line. We stopped blaming him a while ago, Masaru said as they moved along. Since we saw him making a real effort to be a friend to Izuku, I certainly couldn't stay angry with him. Toshinori remained silent as he listened. In truth, Katsuki had confided in him more than once on how to get back into his parents' good graces, but he had told the boy that it was purely up to him. As he saw it, the ashen blonde had nothing left to atone for, even if the boy saw it differently. Izuku certainly didn't hold any grudges against his friend, else he figured that the two of them would want nothing to do with each other. As they continued the short walk to the dorm area, the man noticed that they weren't going to be alone in the tour. Principal Nizu was standing just at the gate speaking with 2 men and 2 teenagers, and he recognized all of them. Why, Mr. Yaoyorozu? He called out in a jovial greeting as they approached. How good of you to come today, he said as the man turned toward his group and gave a polite, if stiff, nod of greeting. Endeavor turned to regard the group with his usual cold indifference, mirrored by his son, while the young Yaoyorozu heiress positively beamed when she saw the tall blonde. Mr. Yagi. She came forward at a quick pace and gave a polite bow to the man. I can't thank you enough for having All Might sign off on my endorsement for the recommendation tests, she said happily as she straightened. It was already an honor to have Endeavor vouch for me, but having All Might's backing was truly amazing. Toshinori chuckled heartily as the girl thanked him, though he took note of the sneer on Endeavor's face at the mention of his alter ego. Will that man never cease this useless rivalry? He wondered to himself fleetingly. There's no need to thank me, my dear. Toshinori smiled at the girl as her father stepped up behind her. You've earned the right to be here just as much as those that are going to take the exams today, he said as he tipped his hat to her father. Quite a rare sight to see you out and about like this, Toshinori. Nizu stepped up to the tall blonde and regarded the two families. But I dare say that I'm happy to see you in such fine company, he said as Endeavor and Shoto alighted behind him. Mr. Todoroki, he said, gaining the giant man's attention as he gestured to Inko. This is the mother of the young man with the optic blast quirk you observed several months ago. At this, Endeavor took real interest in the woman. Really? He asked as he looked down at the petite woman. Your son has a bright future ahead of him if he can learn to control that quirk of his. Inko looked visibly shaken by the man's imposing presence. Yes, thank you, Mr. Endeavor, she said nervously, attempting to keep herself calm. Luckily, Mr. Yagi was able to have a piece of support gear made for him that allows some form of control over it. Toshinori nodded with a small chuckle as Momo looked at him, a small blush coming to her cheeks. And might I add that the Dragonite visor looks quite sharp on the boy, he said with a sly wink in the girl's direction. Isshin gave the man a small look of confusion. Dragonite is quite a rare metal, Mr. Yagi, he said with a familiar hint of greed in his voice that his daughter recognized. Why waste it on something as mundane as a piece of support gear? Toshinori chuckled. As you say, it is a rare metal and quite possibly the strongest known to man, he agreed. However, seeing as young Midoriya was able to slightly damage adamantium with his optic blast, we decided against using it, and vibranium would possibly harm him if the metal absorbed too much energy, so we went with the next best thing, he explained with a smile. Dragonite doesn't absorb energy like vibranium does, and it is stronger than both other metals, so it won't be damaged by his quirk, making it perfect, if not just a tad expensive. I see your reasoning, the businessman said, though it still seems quite troublesome to have to use such a precious resource for mere equipment. Meanwhile, as the two men were talking, 𝐭 took a moment to chat with Momo. I'm truly happy to see you back on your feet again, dear, she said as the girl smiled at her. It usually takes quite a while to heal from such an ordeal. Momo just shrugged. Thanks to my metabolism, I tend to heal pretty quickly, she said, patting her flat stomach. Plus, since I use my lipids to power my quirk, I stay in very decent shape. Ahem, 𝗍𝗓 coughed into his paw. Well, it's nice to see you all getting along so well, the little mammal said, gesturing to the dorms. We may want to continue the tour before our prospective students get ready to attempt the practical exam. 𝗵𝗲 huffed. He's right, the man said. I'd rather not miss the chance to see the boy with the optic quirk in action, he said before following after the principal while he led the way. I quite agree, Toshinori said as he, 𝗵𝗀, and the Bakugos tailed after them, and I think you find yourself pleasantly surprised with how well the boys perform. I'm only interested in the green-haired one, the man said with a sneer. Shoto frowned at his father. Is he trying to make me jealous or something? He wondered as the Yaoyorozu filed in behind them. A few moments later, 𝗍𝗓 was smiling grandly as he showed them inside the dorms. As you can see, we've spared no expense in our attempts to make our students comfortable, he said as he presented the large common room. Here we have the living area with an attached kitchen and dining room. Neither 𝐼𝐴 nor 𝗵𝗲 were very impressed. Momo, however, was very pleased. It's so nice, she beamed happily. Quaint, her father agreed. 𝗵𝗏 and Mitsuki were rather impressed. It's lovely, 𝗵𝗏 said as she took in the large area. This is far bigger than our little apartment. You know, you should really move out of that dingy old place, Mitsuki said as she surveyed the kitchen. It might do you some good to try something new. She smiled. This is a really nice kitchen, she turned to the principal. Are the students supposed to cook for themselves? 𝗍𝗓 raised a paw. It is encouraged, however. They are always welcomed in lunch rush's cafeteria, he said while the woman nodded in understanding. Shall we have a look at the rooms now? Yes, please. Momo beamed excitedly, already planning on how she would decorate it. 𝗍𝗓 led them into the hallway and opened up one of the many doors aligning it. When the selection is finished, we will be attempting to keep the male and female students separated on different floors to avoid any funny business, the rodent said while Toshinori chuckled, though, as I'm sure you're all aware, completely avoiding such cases are next to impossible. I believe that our students will be on their best behavior, as we will have the class homeroom teacher monitoring them at all times. 𝐼𝐴 looked at his daughter. I have little worry that my daughter will conduct herself with dignity as befitting a member of our family, he said with a sideways glance at Shoto. That being said, if any boy lays a hand on her during her time here, I will personally see to their ruin. Momo smiled at her father. Oh, you know that I can take care of myself if the need arises. Be that as it may, daughter, I would prefer you as far away from the boys' dorms as possible, he said with a pointed look toward the principal. I hope you will take that to heart, Mr. 𝗍𝗓. Indeed, I shall, the mammal said, and Toshinori could see the fur on the back of his neck rising. He knew very well that the hyper-intelligent mammal didn't care for others telling him how to run his school. 𝗍𝗓 then opened one of the doors, showing the room inside. Now, as you can see, the dorm rooms themselves are of a decent size, more than large enough to fit in several pieces of furniture. They also have a medium-sized ensuite bathroom complete with a large shower stall, toilet, sink, and vanity. He smiled as he continued while the group filed in to take a look around. Each room also sports 2 small windows for added light. Momo was giggling inside. This isn't even half the size of my room at home, she thought giddily. I love it. Toshinori smiled at the size of the room. This is quite nice for a simple dormitory, he noted with a look of appreciation. Too bad UA didn't have dorms like this when I attended. 𝗵𝗏 blinked at him. You attended UA? Indeed, I did, the man smiled, though I'm afraid that I never managed to make a name for myself before I was badly injured and forced to take a desk job, he lamented sadly, though I can't say that I'm sorry for the results. He chuckled as 𝗵𝗲 looked at him suspiciously. Now I get to see the next generation take up the mantle. Shoto looked at the man with slight interest. You were forced to quit being a hero because of an injury? The heterochromic boy asked. What sort of injury causes something like that? A good question, 𝗵𝗲 said with a look in the man's direction. You must not have been a licensed hero for very long if I haven't heard of you. The blonde man let out a loud laugh. Quite right, 𝗵𝗲, he smiled before gently patting his left side. I didn't even have a license when I got hurt. I was just an intern when a villain I was needed to fight took me down. He explained, my left lung was so badly damaged that the doctors had to remove part of it, and my stomach was almost beyond repair. Good heavens. 𝐒𝐭𝐲 had gone extremely pale. Oh, I can't believe I'm letting my baby go through with this hero nonsense. She bemoaned while Mitsuki and Masaru patted her shoulders comfortingly. Surprisingly, it was Momo that verbally comforted the woman. Now, Ms. Midoriya, not all heroes and heroines end up like that. She's right, my dear, Toshinori agreed. I was young and careless when I was injured, but Izuku and Katsuki don't seem the types to let their guards down easily. 𝗵𝗲 thought of voicing his own opinion of the two boys, considering he had seen them in action during the pileup near Dagobah Beach some weeks ago, but refrained from saying anything. Isshin was still sore at his son for his accusations on that day, and he was still paying for it in more ways than one. Nizu smiled kindly at the woman, however. He's quite right to praise your sons, the principal said. From what Mr. Yagi has told me, they will be among this year's best of the best. He smiled happily. I honestly can't wait to have them enrolled. 𝗏𝗏 sighed. Thank you all, she said, reaching into her purse for a handkerchief. I'm sorry for being such a worrywart over all this, but I can't seem to help myself sometimes. I know the feeling quite well, madam. Isshin spoke up with a gesture to his daughter. I honestly don't want my daughter anywhere near this nonsense, but it is what she wants. He lamented with a sigh. Momo almost gagged at his bad acting, so I must endure it. Nizu brought his paws together then. Indeed, and to bring things back on topic, I do hope that the dormitories meet your satisfaction for your children's needs, he said cheerfully. As I've said, I've spared no expense to ensure that they will be comfortable here. Masaru nodded to the mammal. I wanted to ask you something, he said as the principal turned to him. What sort of security do you have here? He asked. I haven't seen any form of guards or heroes on patrol since we've arrived. Nizu gave a small chuckle. Well, as you know, most if not all of UA's teachers are former top-tier pros. However, we do employ a rather effective robotic sentry here when the day ends. He said, we call them sentinels, and he watch started beeping, prompting him to check the time. Dear me, it seems it's almost time for the practical exams. He beamed. We wouldn't want to miss the children's efforts now, would we? 𝗏𝗏 UA observation room. Several minutes of walking later found the group sitting in a darkened room with 5 large monitors positioned on the walls. Awaiting them were the rest of the teaching staff, as well as 2 other teenagers that had gone through the recommendation exams. Momo smiled, a girl with jagged, sharp teeth, when she saw the heiress. You really made it. Momo smiled at her. Of course, the girl beamed at her. You really didn't think we would miss this, did you, 𝗏𝗏? The 2 girls sat next to each other chatting happily, while the adults took up seats behind them to get a better view. 𝗏𝗏 smiled at how friendly Momo was being with the other 2 students. She's such a sweet girl, she remarked to her father. You and your wife must be very proud of her. She saw the man stiffen slightly when she mentioned his wife. Oh, I'm sorry, she frowned sadly. I suppose that she's no in the picture? Isshin shook his head. Indeed, she is not. The man sighed, closing his eyes. She passed while giving birth to our son, Momo's twin brother. He said in a clipped tone, I haven't had the stomach to remarry. Mitsuki gave the man a look of sympathy. Does your daughter resemble her in any way? He nodded. They are nearly identical save for her quirk, he said. My wife was quirkless, you see, so she inherited a stronger version of my quirk. It's such a shame. 𝗏𝗏 hung her head. If she's anything like her mother, then I believe I would have liked to have met her. Isshin wished to end the conversation before he was forced to say too much. Fortunately, the practical exam started off with very little flair as President Mike opened the gates to the grounds, allowing the students to make a mad dash in search of their targets. Are Katsuki and Izuku in the same area? Masaru asked as he searched for the 2 boys on the screen. Toshinori shook his head. Afraid not, Mr. Bakugo, he said. It's a little something that Nizu cooked up when he took over, he explained. When we have students from the same school taking the practical, they are split up into different areas of the testing ground to avoid them attempting to help each other. Indeed, Nizu said. While I'm not against students helping one another out, I would rather see them giving their all in their own way instead of relying on a friend to get them through a situation, he explained while Masaru nodded. That being said, I do love it when students that have never met each other before offer their aid when they truly need it. Inko was looking around for her son on each screen before she spotted a flash of red. Oh, there's my baby. She beamed as the cameras zoomed in on him. He was seen helping another boy to his feet while blasting a large green robot that looked more like an armored tank. In her seat, Momo let out a quiet little gasp when she saw the boy using the visor she had made for him. It looks really good on him, she thought with a light blush coming to her cheeks. The girl sitting next to her noticed this and gave her a light jab with her elbow. Got your eye on that one, huh? She grinned teasingly while Momo looked at her in shock. She feigned a look of betrayal. Oh, what a tragedy. I had my heart set on seducing you myself. Setsuna, Momo admonished in a harsh whisper, looking over her shoulder toward her father. The man seemed to have not heard them, to which she was eternally thankful for. Please, if my father heard you, he'd. Setsuna smiled at her. Just a few more days and you won't have to worry about him, she whispered huskily, leaning toward her. Then it'll be just you and me, and the little greenie out there makes 3. She winked at her, prompting the sheltered girl's face to positively explode with steam at the implications. Oh, you tart. Momo huffed and returned her gaze to the monitors, intent on watching the chaos of the exam. Setsuna just giggled. Call me whatever you want, honey, she leaned in close to her ear, but I can tell you like him. Momo chose not to respond just as a massive explosion went off on one of the other monitors. Yes. Mitsuki suddenly crowed. That's my boy. She shouted proudly as her son appeared on the screen, looking more feral than he had in years as his palms smoldered while he wore a sadistic look of pleasure as he stood over the destroyed remains of a horde of robots he had just taken down. Endeavor was looking at the ashen blonde with new interest. His quirk is quite powerful too, isn't it? He muttered mostly to himself but was heard by one of the teachers in the room. Quite a bit more aggressive than the other hopefuls, though, said a woman in a leather corset. I rather like that. He'll make a fine addition. Down Midnight, said a tired voice next to her. We don't need another lawsuit against us because of your libido. The now named Midnight just pouted at him. That was one time she defended herself, and it was perfectly legal since the student was over 18. Keyword being student, said a steampunk cowboy-themed hero with a laugh. But you're right, he'll do pretty good if he can tame that aggression. He turned toward the principal. Who's keeping score of the combat points? Nizu smiled. Since we have so many guests, I have reliable teachers from the general studies courses keeping track of the accumulated points, he said while bringing out a tablet out of his vest. According to this, our young Bakugo is already sitting pretty at 40 points thus far. Masaru looked at him. Is that enough to pass? Now, Nizu chuckled. That would ruin the suspense, wouldn't it? He said while he looked over at another teacher wearing bulldozer-themed armor. Majima, how are we doing on time? Majima checked his phone. Another 5 minutes until we put them to the real test. He smiled, looking at the screen. Then we get to see who really has what it takes. Inko didn't like the sound of that, even though her son was doing incredibly well as he shot down more robots in rapid succession, even taking time to help more examinees. Toshinori reached over and took hold of her hand. Don't worry, he smiled at her. He's going to be just fine. She smiled at him in thanks, nodding slowly as she turned her attention back to the screen. 𝐒𝐬𝐬𝐵. UA Practical Testing Area. Gate B. Attention examinees. Present Mick's voice blared out. There are only 10 minutes remaining in the exam. Better hurry. Izuku smiled as he blasted another robot, earning himself another 3 points. And that makes 49, he sighed to himself, feeling a little winded from all the running around he had been doing. He then looked around the area for any more of the mechanical pests. Looks like this area's cleared out, he muttered and took off at a jog toward another street. Maybe I've got enough to pass? He wondered, silently hoping that at least one more robot would cross his path. As he passed into an alley, he took notice of someone sitting against the wall with their head hung low. Hey! Izuku shouted, thinking they were injured as he hurried over to them. Are you all right? The student looked up, revealing a teenage boy with wild purple hair. Huh? The teen muttered, looking up at the visored teen. Oh yeah, I just figured I should quit now while I'm ahead. Izuku smiled. Got enough points already? The boy shook his head. Not a damned one. He sighed and hung his head again. I don't have a flashy quirk like you and the others, and it won't even work on these stupid robots. He jerked his thumb toward the streets where other students were still fighting. What kind of quirk do you have? Izuku asked right before the ground started shaking. What the heck? Screams erupted from the streets around them as the examinees stampeded back toward the gates. The purple-haired teen rose with a frown on his face. That can't be good. Come on. Izuku said and ran toward the chaos. 𝐒𝐻 somewhere in the exam area. Sir, it is just as you said a trembling voice as the shadow of the colossal machine passed over them. Yue has unleashed a truly giant machine. Good, said the voice in his ear. Now use the device I gave you. After that, destroy it and make yourself scarce. Remember what relies on your enrollment into that school. The student nodded their hand and held out a small wafer-thin remote toward the machine. Oui, monsieur. Their thumb came down on the solitary button, sending out a signal toward the monster and all the remaining robots in the area before the remote was tossed onto the ground and smashed under their foot. Across the testing ground, the remaining robots began attacking the students with more ferocity, making use of their weapons. Up in the observation room, 𝗵𝗲 got an alert on his phone. What the? He frowned as he checked it out, his eyes widening. Son of a bitch. He turned toward the principal. Someone's just activated the 𝗲𝗏𝗺𝗺𝗺𝗔 weapons system. What did you say? 𝗧𝗏 shouted, his fur standing on end. How? 𝗵𝗲 leapt up from his seat and headed for the door. I don't know, but I need to get to Control Center to shut them down ASAP. He shouted, Midnight, get Mike to help the students. Those things are only shooting rubber rounds, but they can still cause some serious damage. I'm on it, Midnight said while pulling out her phone. 𝗧𝗏 looked to Endeavor. I'm sorry to ask this of you, but could I ask for your help in this? Endeavor rose. I'm on my way. Toshinori rose from his seat as well. There's no need, he said and pointed toward the screen. Look at that. 𝗧𝗏𝗵𝗲. UA Practical Testing Area. Gate G. Watch where the fuck you're going, you morons. Katsuki roared out angrily as he pulled a fallen student from the ground to keep them from being trampled. He then shoved the student back to their feet and sent them stumbling down the street. You guys are supposed to be UA's hopefuls. Quit acting like a bunch of pussies. He snapped before blasting himself into the air above the stampede of students running from the rampaging robots. He then rocketed down toward the group of pursuing machines, thrusting out his arms as he neared them. Eat this. He let loose with the most powerful explosion he could manage, his arms lacing with pain from the backlash produced by the blast. The robots were easily blown apart as the boy landed. He surveyed the damage he had done with a grin. That looks like the last of them, he smirked, and I just racked myself up a huge amount of points. Attention students, President Mick's voice shouted. The 𝗲𝗏𝗺𝗺𝗺𝗺𝗺 are malfunctioning. Please vacate the testing area as quickly as possible and try to help anyone that needs it. Katsuki frowned. Are you kidding me? He shouted just as a red beam of energy cut through one of the buildings. Oh, great, that's gotta be Deku. He snapped and shot into the air again. Meanwhile, Izuku and his new companion were attempting to stem the tide of robots, as well as herd the panicking students away from danger. Izuku was firing his optic blast as fast as he could manage without hitting anything other than the robots. Deku! He heard from above them and saw Katsuki coming in hot for a landing. You idiot! He set off a blast that not only softened his landing, but also destroyed a robot that was creeping up on him. You heard Mike, didn't you? Gotta get out of here. Izuku shook his head, blasting another machine. Not until everyone's clear. Easier said than done. The purple-haired teen shouted over the noise. Hey, stop pushing people and move your ass. He shouted to one student that was shoving their way through the crowd, knocking others down in the process. You want to be a hero, don't you? Act like it. Katsuki smirked. I like your new friend Deku. He blew up another small group coming toward them. Guys got some balls. Thanks, the boy said. What was making the ground shake? Katsuki shouted back as he fought. No idea. He threw one of the smaller robots over his head and smashed it into the ground. I thought something blew up. It was a huge robot. One of the running students shouted. The really big one that President Mike told us to avoid. They said before running along with the rest of the fleeing students. Izuku frowned. The zero-pointer? He shot down another robot. Just how big is this thing? And then, as if responding to his question, a massive mechanical hand grasped the side of a building, and an even larger rectangular head peered around it. The purple-haired teen paled. Holy shit. You just had to ask. Katsuki snapped at his friend. Didn't you? Izuku snapped back. Well, how was I supposed to know we'd be dealing with a Gundam knockoff? He demanded as the trio started backing up. How many are left? The as-yet unnamed teen ushered one last student by. I think that was the last. The zero-pointer smashed an arm through one of the fake buildings, sending rubble flying in all directions. Izuku and Katsuki blasted much of it out of the air before it could hit any of the other students, but one smaller piece got through and smashed Izuku right in the face, sending his visor flying off into the streets. He instantly slammed his eyes shut as he stumbled. Kaken, my visor. He yelled, completely blind. Shit. The ashen blonde looked around, seeing no sign of it nearby. Goddammit. He grabbed one of Izuku's arms. Take his other side. He ordered the other boy. We've gotta. Ow. Izuku halted. What was that? Someone's trapped back there. The boy to his left shouted. She's right under that thing. Izuku ground his teeth. Turn me around. He shouted. Now. Are you nuts? Katsuki snapped. Don't argue with me, Kaken. Just do it. The blinded teen snapped back. And get ready to get her out of there. He said before turning to his new friend. What's your name? Shinso. The boy stammered out. Hitoshi Shinso. Izuku nodded. Alright, I need you to brace me and help me aim my eyes right at that thing. He instructed. After I've made my shot, Katsuki can move in and get her out of there. He heard Shinso take a deep breath and felt him move behind him, one hand on the back of his head, the other bracing against his back. Okay, Shinso breathed out. Ready when you are. Katsuki took Izuku's chin in hand and moved his head into position. Alright, you idiot, the blonde sighed. You owe me big time for this one. All the mango habanero wings you can eat, Izuku promised. And whatever Shinso wants. Shinso chuckled. In that case, he peeked over the teen's curly hair. Fire. Izuku opened his eyes and his quirk erupted, completely unrestrained. Shinso grunted as he braced the teen, shocked by the force he was feeling. Damn. The beam struck the giant robot dead center of the chest, shredding metal as it was blasted apart. Go Kaken go. 𝐒𝐬𝐽. Katsuki jumped away and rocketed toward the trapped girl as she covered her head while debris from the robot fell around her. He saw that her leg was trapped under a large piece of concrete as he skidded to a landing next to her. Hold on. He reached under the concrete and placed his palm against it. The resulting explosion blew the slab apart, freeing the girl. He reached down and threw her over his shoulder before pelting back toward his friends. Thank you. He heard the girl say shakily. Don't talk, you'll bite your tongue. He warned her, glancing back over his shoulder as the giant machine was being shredded by Izuku's quirk. 𝗧𝗵𝗲. UA observation room. Toshinori was on his feet shouting with pride. Now that's what I'm talking about, shouted the exuberant man. That's what real heroes look like. Inko was sobbing loudly as Mitsuki comforted her, even though she was almost as teary as her friend was. Masaru was smiling widely. That's my boy. Someone find out the name of that other young man. Nizu ordered as Majima came back into the room. I don't care how well he did in the practical. I want him in the hero course. Majima sighed in relief when he saw that the situation hadn't gotten any worse. I've shut down the remaining robots, boss, he told the principal, but I couldn't trace the signal source. Nizu frowned. Toshinori, quiet down for a moment. The mammal shouted over the celebrating, gaining the blonde's attention. Get David Shield on the line, and have him en route to overhaul our security and our remote systems. Nizu ordered. This was an attack against our school, and while no one was seriously hurt, I will not tolerate even the slightest chance of this happening again. Yes, sir, right away, Toshinori said as he pulled out his phone. Ms. Midnight, please escort Ms. Midoriya and the Bakugos down to the infirmary, he instructed. Snipe, get down to the testing area and have those 4 children brought straight to Recovery Girl. I'm on it, Snipe, the cowboy-themed hero said. Nizu sighed, before turning to the parents of Shoto and Momo. I deeply apologize for this incident, he said with heavy regret. I will understand if you wish to withdraw your children from my school after this assault. Endeavor shook his head. You handled the situation as well as could be expected, all things considered, he said, looking down at his son, having remained motionless for the entire incident. Any other school would have the same or lesser results. Isshin sighed. My daughter was not hurt, so I cannot place blame, the man said as he regarded his daughter next to the sharp-toothed girl, noticing that she was crying with relief. But should she come to harm here from a similar incident? He trailed off, letting the threat hang in the air for good measure. She won't, Nizu promised. I will make certain of it. Extreme measures. Dr. Qiudaiguraki, as he was currently known, was not overly fond of heroes. How could he be? He himself was considered a villain, even though his experiments were meant to strengthen quirks. What did it matter to him if some of his test subjects expired during the augmentation procedures? He could still collect valuable data from the corpses they left behind. However, some of the best quirks he had seen were produced by heroes. The idea sent a shiver of disgust through him. Truly, he hated heroes that couldn't see the need for his brilliance, which was why he had kept his research secret for the better part of 2 centuries. It helped that his quirks allowed him not only to live a long life, but also kept him from being recognized. Yes, Qiudaiguraki had more than one quirk. It was quite a feat to accomplish considering what had to go through to obtain them. Now, thanks to his centuries of long, grueling work, he was functionally immortal. Yet it wasn't enough. He wanted so much more. Which is why, when his master had appeared before him all those years ago, he had regarded him akin to a god. Now, so many long years later, they were almost ready to see the product that the doctor had been waiting for since the days of his youth. I heard that 2 of your old experiments passed the UA exams recently, the voice of his master said from a statusy screen off to the side of where he was working. You must be quite proud of them? The doctor snorted. He turned to the screen. I'm not so proud of their chosen careers, master, he said with a frown of disapproval on his face. One of them I knew was going to be a lost cause considering how much he idolized that hulking buffoon All Might. He heard his master chuckle from the screen. However, I thought the other one would be more inclined to walk the darker path, considering how aggressive he's become. There's still time, my old friend, the master said with a hint of amusement in his voice. After all, my spy within this year's crop of students recently informed me of his acceptance into that idiotic school. The master began to chuckle more loudly, a wheeze entering his voice. If all goes according to plan, you may yet have one or both of your experiments back. Qiudai gave out a breathy sigh. I certainly hope so. He pinched the bridge of his nose. I would do most anything to have them back, of course, but that one boy is dead set on becoming a hero. He sat back with longing entering his voice. His powers are only going to get stronger from this point on. It was blind luck that his quirk hadn't activated before meeting with me the first time. Quite powerful, is he? The master asked. I remember you telling me over tea that his parents had the potential to produce quite a unique offspring. Qiudai gave a very wide, sickening grin. Oh, my dear old friend, the doctor said in amusement. I think you'll find that this boy has quite the surprise in store for us all. He chuckled. Speaking of surprises, did you happen to receive the documents I forwarded to you about Chisaki and his anti-quirk bullets? I did indeed, the master said. My young apprentice and I found them quite an interesting read. His voice hardened. I involuntarily sucked the life out of my mother the day I was born, but I never actively harmed children. The doctor waved his hand dismissively, which is why I'm only working on the refinement, he said. I know you don't care for the butchery of children, so I would rather keep my hands clean, so to speak. A wise choice, the master said. Let us speak more of our coming operations at UA, he suggested. How go the enhancements for the Momo? Qiudai hummed in thought for a moment. Quite well, honestly, the physical enhancements have all been completed to the point that even if the creature didn't have a strength augmentation quirk, it would still be far stronger than anyone at that school save for All Might, he said rather fondly as he continued on about the experiment. Initially, I had planned to only integrate 3 separate quirks, however. I thought that a few more couldn't hurt. My apprentice will be pleased to hear that, the master chuckled. He's rather looking forward to commanding the beast. The doctor smiled proudly, as he should. The man said, along with the hyper-regeneration, shock absorption, and super strength, I've also taken the liberty of integrating a variation of spear-like bones into the creature, bone claws. He grinned widely as he laughed. Getting close to this creation of ours will be a tremendous mistake for any heroes that dare to fight it. A dark chuckle came from the screen. Well, we did design this creature with All Might's death in mind. The master laughed. Speaking of design, I was thinking of rewarding our little spy for his efforts at the entrance exams. Oh, said the doctor in a pleasant tone. What did you have in mind? The screen crackled for a moment. You are aware that the naval laser and optic blast quirks are twin quirks birthed from that plasma blast quirk I obtained some time ago, are you not? The doctor chuckled. But, of course, he said, the subject we extracted that particular quirk from was rather. The man trailed off on another round of soft laughter, shall we say more than a little perturbed about losing his powers. He said rather fondly. Wasn't he, though? The master chuckled. As you are aware, the original quirk allowed the body to metabolize ambient energies such as gamma, X-rays, and stellar energies into a powerful plasma blast that emanated from all sides of the body. Kyudai nodded. Yes, quite a magnificent quirk, he said. As I remember, you had me make copies of it so that we could potentially reward our underlings. He looked at the screen curiously. Your spy has a limited control over it, considering that little kickback you worked into it. He chuckled. That truly was a cruel trick you played on the boy, especially after his parents begged you to help him. Oh yes, I know. The master chuckled darkly. But I really couldn't resist, he admitted with no hint of shame in his voice. However, since the boy did so well in this first test, I thought about rewarding him with the original quirk. Kyudai gave the screen a frown. Are you certain? He asked. Should he turn against us, that particular quirk could prove quite the annoying thorn in the side. The master chuckled gleefully. I understand your concerns, my friend, the master said. However, you must remember that not only do we have the boy's parents under constant surveillance, but the boy is also a sniveling coward. 𝐒𝐻𝐽. 1 week after Yue's entrance exams. I'm telling you, Deku, the sooner we do this, the better. Katsuki said with his arms crossed in front of his friend/rival. You don't need to be a fucking baby about it. Even behind his ruby quartz glasses, the ashen blonde could tell that the boy's eyes were watering to extreme levels. Boo, but I've had them for years. The verdette whined. I can't just give them all up. Katsuki sighed in exasperation. You want the bike, don't you? He asked while his friend nodded slowly. Auntie Inko doesn't have the money for it, so if you really want it, then you gotta bite the bullet and get the money yourself. He gestured around the room, and that means selling your All Might merch. Izuku hit his knees. I can't. He threw his head back in despair. It's all mint. First edition. Valuable. Katsuki yelled at him, rubbing his fingers together. Worth a lot of money. Enough money to buy that bike. He reached down and hoisted Izuku to his feet. Now stop being a total bitch and help me pack some of this shit up. It's not shit. It's my treasure. Izuku shouted back heatedly, starting up a whole new argument. In the living room of the Midoriya's little apartment, Inko and Mitsuki were listening with great amusement. Wow, the ashen blonde woman chuckled. To think that Lil Izzy's seriously thinking about selling his All Might collection? Her lip twitched as she saw her son with a box in his arms while Izuku, his glasses sitting on his face crookedly, was being dragged across the floor whilst holding onto one of Katsuki's leg. Thank goodness he had his eyes closed. I never thought I'd see the day. Inko nodded somewhat sadly. I know, and I feel terrible about the reason he's doing it, she sighed whilst listening to her son's forlorn wails. I mean, this wouldn't be necessary if I had pushed for more money during the divorce. No, not that. Izuku suddenly roared. That All Might bust is only one of 5 in the world. Oh, get over it, you pussy. Katsuki roared back. It's the same stuff they make toilets out of. It is not. Izuku yelled, completely outraged. Bullshit, it isn't. Katsuki fired back. Now give it here. No. Mitsuki glanced at her friend, seeing her cheeks puffed out in silent laughter. Terrible, huh? The woman grinned at her friend while Inko shushed her. I think it was pretty mature of him, though. She went on while their sons continued to argue back and forth about what to take. I mean, sure he could keep it, but what good is a bunch of posters, toys, and whatnot going to do him? She reasoned. Now that motorcycle he's wanting, that's an investment. Just so he doesn't have to take the train home when he wants to visit me, Inko said with a sniffle. Oh, my baby boy really is leaving, isn't he? Mitsuki reached for the box of tissues on the coffee table and plucked a few out for her. This is so hard. Where did all the time go? Inko blubbered before blowing her nose. Mitsuki snorted. I hear you, but I can't help but think of this as an opportunity. Inko looked at her curiously. Well, think about it. After my brat was born, Masaru, and I couldn't even think of having another kid since Katsuki's quirk is so. She trailed off, her thoughts bringing up bad memories of when her boy had hurt her nephew so badly. Ahem. She coughed. Let's just say that we're starting to think about child number 2. She gave a small, mischievous grin at her friend, who giggled. It had better be a girl this time, Inko said. You were so disappointed when you found out Katsuki was going to be a boy. Mitsuki rolled her eyes. Thank God we picked out a unisex name, she muttered. We spent months trying to think of a name for the key before he popped out. No, not the trading cards. HNDM over ya damn uber nerd. But they're gold leaf. Who cares? Mitsuki hung her head as the boys' shouting rose in volume. But instead of a beautiful little girl, I got saddled with that. She pointed her thumb in the direction of the arguing boys before raising her eyes to the ceiling. Lord, if you're listening, please bless me with a baby girl. She prayed while wiping a fake tear from her eye. Inko giggled quietly. Oh, come now, Katsuki's come a long way these last few years and you know it. Mitsuki frowned at her. Duck. Inko ducked her head down just as an action figure sailed over her. Well, the woman muttered as she straightened back up, it's still an improvement. Hey, that was my favorite action figure. You're too fucking old to sleep with dolls. Mitsuki's brow rose as she looked from the fallen toy to the squabbling boys. He's just being a brat, right? She asked as she pointed to the toy. He doesn't really sleep with any of them, does he? Inko shook her head. Oh no, he hasn't done that in. She trailed off, her brow furrowing. Mitsuki snorted. Had to think about that one, huh? The woman shook her head while rolling her eyes. Honestly, I'd rather I caught him in bed with a girl, Inko muttered while the sounds of scuffling continued. She shook her head. I swear, Mitsuki, it's been murder. That boy of mine is such a ninny around girls that I'm starting to wonder if I'll ever be a grandmother. Mitsuki belted out a laugh. Oh, I know what you mean. She laughed, holding onto her stomach. My boy likes girls well enough. I can tell from all the magazines I found under his bed. Inko grimaced. She knew boys would be boys, but she nearly cried when she found a full body spread of midnight tucked under her son's mattress. But the only girls he would actually be interested in would be one that could literally kick his ass in a straight-up brawl. You know, I think I'd like to see that. Inko giggled good-naturedly. Little Katsu getting beaten up by a girl half his size. Both women laughed as said ashen blonde boy came out of Izuku's room with several boxes in his arms. Deku, I swear to God. He snapped at the boy still clinging to his leg. Make up your fucking mind. The bike or this useless junk. The boy looked up at him with tears streaming from under his lenses. But these are my treasures. Izuku whined as he was dragged along toward the front door. I already sold mine. Katsuki reminded him. Both boys being avid collectors of All Might memorabilia and hero merchandise in general, the blonde bomber had sold his collection the previous day when they had gotten their acceptance letters. Now he was all set to purchase his own motorcycle. And he hadn't shed a tear. Not Katsuki Bakugo. Nope, not a single tear. Izuku would forever keep the picture of his best friend crying over his lost treasures. Both women chuckled and giggled as the two boys bumbled their way to the front door. Katsuki was extremely determined to even up to score of them selling the merchandise at this point, and there was nothing that was going to stop him since both boys had agreed to sell their collections. But as he reached for and opened the door, it was to find their blonde-haired trainer standing on the other side, his hand raised poised to knock. Oh, the man said in a jovial tone. Perfect timing, young Bakugo. Katsuki's sneer turned into a friendly for him grin. Oh, hey, 𝐒𝐻𝐢. The man nodded at the greeting before he was startled by Izuku from his spot on the floor. Mr. Yagi. The boy yelled tearfully. Woke young Midoriya is on the floor. Yelped the man as he stumbled back. Why is young Midoriya on the floor? He asked Katsuki more calmly this time. Kaken's making me sell all of my treasures. Izuku wailed as Katsuki looked down at him with disgust. Please. Make him stop. I don't need the bike. A vein pulsed on the ashen blonde's head. Oh no you don't. He snapped, barging past their trainer whilst dragging the sobbing teen along. I had to sell mine. You're gonna sell yours. Toshinori chuckled as the pair vacated the complex and let himself in. I always seem to catch this little home in an uproar, he said by way of greeting to the two women. What was that all about anyway? Mitsuki just chuckled while 𝐭𝐽𝐽𝐲's face visibly brightened when she saw the man. Oh, the boys had their eyes on a couple of beat-up motorcycles, the blonde woman explained flippantly, and poor little Izuku went on one of his muttering sprees and suggested selling off some of their collectibles, or all of them in my boy's case. So of course he wanted to keep things fair between them and convinced Izuku to sell his too. Convinced is a very strong word at this point, Mitsuki. 𝐭𝐽𝐽𝐲 giggled as she invited the man to sit with them. It was all fine and dandy when Katsuki sold his things the other day. But my poor boy went completely bonkers as soon as they started boxing things up. Toshinori had a good laugh at that while he seated himself. I can't imagine a huge fanboy like him wanting to sell off any merchandise like that, he chortled. Anyway, I wanted to drop by today and let you know that the boys can start moving into the dorms as early as today. What? 𝐭𝐽𝐽𝐲 squawked forlornly. So soon? Toshinori looked to Mitsuki for an answer, and the woman shook her head with a shrug. No, looking forward to having an empty nest. The man nodded before turning his attention back to the petite woman. Never fear, Ms. Midoriya. Izuku will surely visit you as often as he can. Mitsuki nodded. If for nothing else than to have his favorite meal prepared, she grinned while 𝐭𝐽𝐽𝐲 glared at her. 𝐒𝐽𝐽𝐽𝐲 Yaoyorozu estate. Momo was absolutely giddy with excitement as she packed the few belongings that she wished to bring with her to UA. Finally she would be free of her stifling life in her family's mansion. Of course, she couldn't let such happiness show in front of her family maids or butlers, no. They would more certain inform her father of her elation and eagerness to get away from him. Young miss, one of said employees said from the door, not even bothering to knock. The furniture that you requested be moved to the dorms has been transported. The maid said with a bow. Thank you, Sakurai, the young woman said in her false tone. Have my luggage transported next. She then instructed, I wish to familiarize myself with the school and its curriculum as soon as possible. At once, young miss. The maid clicked her fingers, prompting two young men in black attire to attend to Momo's luggage. Also, young miss, the master wishes to speak with you before your departure. Momo suppressed a feeling of dread. I will see him now, then, she said and followed the maid out of her room. As they walked along the halls of the huge mansion she had called home for the last 14 years, she felt no remorse in the thought of leaving it behind. How could she? She was as much a prisoner in her own home than she would be at Tartarus. The maid opened the door for her, announcing her to her father as she entered his study. As always, she found him sitting at his desk, pen in hand, signing away on one document after another. He looked up at her as she entered. Ah, good, you've come. He gestured to the seat in front of his desk where she quickly and gracefully sat. I'm told that you wish to leave this evening to familiarize yourself with the campus and its inner workings? I thought it prudent, father, the girl said in a flat tone. However, if you wish for me to delay my departure? Her father shook his head. It is of no consequence, he said dismissively. However, I must remind you to conduct yourself properly as befits a member of this house. Of course, father, Momo nodded. Her father looked up from his documents and placed his pen down. Make no mistake, dear daughter, his eyes were cold and dark. I have spared no expense for your education. And UA, while hailed as the finest educational facility in the country, is not my first choice for you. I understand, father, she replied, fear of his change of heart rising in her chest. Her father continued speaking. Yes, as you should, however. This is business. It requires that you attend that ridiculous hero school. He laced his fingers together and sat back in his chair. And while I find the business itself somewhat distasteful, I would remind you that your efforts to sway the Todoroki boy will have to be exemplary. I will not have that second-rate hero ruffian looking down on us. Momo's brow creased in determination. Of course not, father, she said, not willing to let the giant of a man see her in an unfavorable light for a while. Father, could I pose a question? Which is? Her father inclined his head. Do you not care for the heroic profession? She asked with a straight face while the man's eye gave a barely noticeable twitch. Forgive me if the question is out of line. However, you've been in a foul mood whenever you bring up Endeavor, or any of his colleagues. Isshin furrowed his brow. I care very little either way, as it so happens, he said with a lift of his shoulders, though, as you know, heroes can be an irritation for some of our family business ventures. They are merely an annoyance that can be easily rectified by lining the proper pockets. Momo made a mental note to remember which heroes her father had in his pockets when she had the chance. It would be good for her to have some form of information on them if she needed it. I see. Momo nodded in understanding. As we are speaking of my betrothed, she went on with a small look of distaste that she knew her father would forgive. What if he should remain disinterested in me? Isshin shared her look of distaste. I have been assured that his disinterest will not be a problem when the time comes, he said with assurance that made Momo's stomach drop. He will perform his duties without difficulties, though if he is violent toward you. Momo's eyes hardened with pure malice. He will not remain a man for very long. Isshin seemed pleased with her answer. That should go without saying, he said with approval. Now, as you are about to embark, I will only remind you to remember your manners and mind your grades, he said with a hint of warning. Just because you are in the hero course does not mean you should neglect your other studies. 𝐒𝐻𝐼's business course is the best in the country after all, and should this business venture of mine not pan out, that course should be open to you. Momo rose with determination and bowed. I will not fail you, father. I'm certain that you will not, her father said, dismissing her. She turned and started out of the room. Oh, and Momo? She turned. Stay away from that 𝗳𝗪𝐺 girl, he cautioned her. That child is obviously a bad influence, and I will not have her actions taint your time in that school. Momo offered him a smile. Of course not, father, she said, tongue-in-cheek. I shall not let anyone divert me from our family's goals. 𝐒𝐻𝐽𝐽𝐲 Hospital. Now you're going to feel a minor amount of discomfort as the quirk takes root, young man, 𝗬𝗲𝗄 said to the prone boy strapped to the examination table, but that should only last for half an hour or so. Bien sûr, monsieur, the young man said through grit teeth. I cannot thank you enough for ridding me of that horrible side effect my dazzling beams caused, he said with true gratitude. I truly did not expect mon bienfaiteur to be so pleased with my recent work. The doctor chuckled. Oh, but he was quite pleased, he said jovially, and he is looking forward to your continued cooperation during the next phase of our plans. Mais bien sûr, the boy said. Are my maman and papa doing well? The doctor smiled at his worry. Oh, they are quite enjoying their stay, my dear boy, make no mistake. He leaned down over the boy with a sneering smile coming to his lips. But do keep in mind, dear boy, mistakes are what decide if your parents continue to enjoy my master's hospitality. The boy shivered. Oh oui, monsieur, he mumbled fearfully. What is to be my next assignment? The doctor straightened and plucked at his mustache. We will contact you concerning that once your classes start, he informed the young man, though you should try not to draw too much attention to yourself, he said with a hint of caution in his tone. It wouldn't do for you to be pinned as a spy, would it, Mr. Aoyama? Non, it would not, Aoyama said, defiant tears coming to his eyes as he silently vowed to free his parents, somehow. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 High School conference room several hours later. As per usual, Principal Nizu, the creature that could be a mouse, a dog, or a small bear, was seated at the head of the table while conducting a meeting with the faculty concerning the upcoming term and the arrivals of the newest round of first-year students. The two teachers that he was directing most of his attention to were Shoyuda Aizawa and Sekijiro Kand, the homeroom teachers for classes 1A and 1B respectively. I've gone over the list of students you've requested for this coming year, the mammal said, a stern look on his furry face. Is there any particular reason that I've found a request for Izuku Midoriya in both of your files? Ken shrugged his large shoulders. I took a liking to the kid, he said by way of explanation. From what I was told and my short interactions with him, the young man seems to have a pretty good head on his shoulders and he's sharp as a whip to boot. I've grown rather fond of him myself, Nizu relented with a small nod. But what makes you want him in your class? The blood hero said back with a sigh. Truthfully, I want to see what I can do with his combat prowess, the man sighed. Don't get me wrong, that quirk of his is powerful. More's the pity that it seems uncontrollable without those glasses Majima made for him. He looked at the support course teacher. Nice work on those, by the way. Power Loader nodded his head. Thanks, he said with a hint of pride in his voice. I'm just glad my hunch was right about the ruby quartz. Ken cleared his throat. Right, well, needless to say, he went on. With that much power stored up in his body, and with how much he's capable of releasing, I thought my brand of combat might help him when using his quirk is too dangerous. Nizu gave a small nod. Understandable. Yet Aizawa could easily do the same with him in his own class, the mammal pointed out. Is there anything else you would like to add to your explanation? Other than the fact that I think the boy's too timid for Aizawa's hazing tactics? The man asked with a thumb pointed in the scruffy teacher's direction. I want this kid to do well, Nizu. and I'm worried that if Aizawa gets him, he'll be too harsh with the boy. Aizawa looked at the man. I don't believe in coddling my students, Vlad. I don't either, Eraser. Ken shook his head with a gesture toward him. But when was the last time that a class, let alone a single student, survived your hazing? He demanded. There will be no 2A class this year, thanks to you. He reminded the man. Aizawa shrugged. If they're not worth training, then it's irrational to have them at this school at all. Ken frowned at him. You do realize that 2 out of the 20 students we are allotted with have been recommended, don't you? He demanded. Whether you think the rest of your students are worth training or not, at least those 2 students alone should be immune to your hard-handed methods. And this kid we're arguing over isn't even one of them, Aizawa pointed out, taking the folder in front of him. As I see things, it shouldn't matter if these students were recommended or not, because I refuse to show favoritism to any one student in my class. I'm not asking you to show favoritism, Eraser. I'm asking to act like a proper teacher. Ken snapped. This kid has a bright future ahead of him. But if he's put into your class... 𝗍𝗍 raised his paw. Gentlemen, please, the mammal said in a soft tone. If you two continue on like this, we may never get anything done. He looked toward Aizawa. Of the list of students that you have made, how many of them suit your standards? The man grumbled as he picked up and opened his folder. Honestly, all of them have some form of potential, he muttered. However, some of them seem too entitled to me. He flipped the page open to Izuku's file. It says here that Midoriya's quirk has been actively gathering up solar energy for the past 10 years before it was able to be of use, he muttered while gesturing with the file. If his quirk has a limit to how much energy that his body can safely contain, then there's a chance that he could empty his reserves out and lose all of that energy if he overuses his quirk. And that's justification for putting a target on his back? Ken demanded. Aizawa frowned at him. What if he uses up all of his stored power, and it takes another 10 years for him to gain enough to use it again? He countered. Think about it, Vlad. If his body acts like a battery, then eventually that power is going to run out. It's a valid concern, 𝗍𝗍 put in. However, while we don't know if Mr. Midoriya's quirk has a limit to how much power he can unleash, that certainly doesn't mean that he's beyond help. The mammal reminded the scruffy teacher before looking at the newest member of his staff. Toshinori, you've been training the boy for several months now. He said to the skeletal blonde. What are your takes on his capabilities? Toshinori sat back in his chair, thinking for a moment. In all fairness, I wouldn't count the boy out even if his powers did run dry, he said. There's also the fact that he doesn't use his quirk at full force often. He looked toward the scruffy teacher with a harsh glare. I know you want your students to go all out in your tests, but doing so with young Midoriya, I think will only result in massive damage. Right? The kid's packing a bazooka behind those eyes of his. Ken reminded them all. I realize that you think he's not ready to be put into a hero course, Eraser, but leaving him out in the cold like you always do would only make him a bigger target for anyone that wanted to make use of the kid's quirk. Besides, Namuri Kayama put in with a small gesture toward the 2 teachers. You saw how he fought during the exams, she reminded the teacher. While I don't know what you're looking for in order to ascertain his level of control, I saw some of those beams of his curve, almost as if he was controlling them. Cementos nodded in agreement. There were also a few moments when I saw him make shots with those beams that should have been impossible. He went on as he recalled watching the boy with fascination. His beams seemed to be able to ricochet off of any surface, reflective or otherwise. That is something we discovered later in his training. Toshinori put in. His quirk can bounce off of nearly anything in order to hit a target. He chuckled. After he discovered that little skill, he honed it to extreme levels. The other teachers looked at him curiously. What I mean to say is that he's gained an extreme form of spatial awareness. He can see his surroundings and immediately be able to tell how he can use his quirk on a target, even if he doesn't have a clear line of sight. Ken frowned. He's going to go far, he growled with a sour look in Aizawa's direction, provided that he is allowed to attend this school. 𝗍𝗍 chuckled. If you're worried about Aizawa expelling him on the first day as he did with his previous class, then please don't. Aizawa jumped a little as the mammal's piercing black eyes landed on him. Due to the backlash we received from not only the media, but also the HPSC, if any students are to be expelled from this school, you must come to me well in advance. And even then I intend to see that the student in question be given a chance to improve before any final decisions are made this time around. I thought that I was allowed to run my class as I saw fit. Aizawa frowned at the principal. And you are? 𝗍𝗍 sighed with a softer tone. However, you must remember that tactics such as yours can easily be seen as negative in the eyes of others, he reminded the man. Keep in mind that this school, while it is hailed as the best hero school in the country, if not the world, we have much to worry about. He continued as he regarded the teachers. The R-rated heroine Midnight, known for her necessary displays of nudity while using her quirk in her early days as a heroine, has long been a sour point for many that wish their children to be taught here. I don't mind it. Midnight smiled with a flippant wave of her hand. At the end of the day, I just want to make sure my students are well educated. Nizu nodded. And they are. He smiled at her. And then there's you, Mr. Aizawa. The man frowned beneath his scarf. You're practically unknown to world, which is, as I understand, how you like it. But that coupled with the fact that your teaching habits seem harsh and lazy at times, give this school more than enough problems. Which is why you're telling me not to expel any students, the man sighed. All right, fine, I won't just kick them out, he said before giving the mammal a harsh glare. But so help me if any one of them proves me right, they are out of the school and banned from ever attempting to enroll in another. Nizu sighed but reluctantly agreed. Fine. Now then, there's something I'd like to bring up with you about the students from the recommendation exams. He pulled out 2 photos from his vest, Momo Yaoyorozu and Shoto Todoroki. He looked at Aizawa. I realize that they are both in your class, Aizawa, but I would prefer to have them separated. Any reason why? The man asked curiously. Indeed, the mammal said. Their fathers have arranged a match between the 2 of them, and I've noticed from my interactions with the 2 of them that neither seem keen on the idea. The scruffy teacher just shrugged. Arranged marriages may be old-fashioned, he said, but they are hardly unheard of when it comes to wealthy families. And it's not like this is a quirk marriage, Ken put in. If it were, then I think that Endeavor at least would have picked a partner with a more compatible quirk for his son. He said thoughtfully. For example, since his son uses both fire and ice, a partner with telekinetic abilities would have been better than Miss Yaoyorozu. Yes, you're quite right, Vlad, Nizu said. However, I still think that one of these students should be in your class, Vlad, he continued. While I don't think that they will cause harm to each other, I would rather not take the chance of any altercations in or out of the classrooms. Ken and Aizawa looked at each other. I want Todoroki, Ken said. All right, but that gives you 3 students that were recommended, the man said. In exchange, give me, how about that Tokage girl? He asked, remembering how well she had performed in the tests. Ken gave short nod. Sounds like a fair trade. These are students, not trading cards, Snipe muttered from where he was sitting. Still, you sure it's going to be all right to have them in separate classes? The steampunk cowboy-themed hero asked. If you're asking if separating them will cause issues with the parents, Nizu said, then I have very little doubt that it will. However, I have my ways of getting around it. He rose from his chair. Now then, let us prepare to welcome our new students, he said cheerfully. As I understand it, Miss Yaoyorozu has already begun moving into the 1A dorm. What an eager young lady. Moving in. UA dormitories, Class 1A. Momo Yaoyorozu was in absolute heaven. The moment she had arrived on the campus, she was greeted once again by Mr. Yagi, the man smiling at her with genuine warmth as he showed her to the dormitory she had been assigned to. She was to be in Class 1A, the leading heroics class, under the teachings of a Mr. Shota Aizawa, codename Eraserhead. It was a strange title to be known by, to be sure, and she certainly hadn't heard the name from her father. Still, she thought that the man must be quite talented in order to be her homeroom teacher. Once she was led to her dorm and assigned room, the girl was delighted to find her things already waiting for her in the foyer. Yagi had kindly asked if she needed any help with her things, but, given that she had only brought a few things from home, she turned the offer down and quickly got to work. After living a life of luxury and confinement, the young woman wanted nothing but simplicity. The school had provided a single bed for her, just barely big enough for 2 people to lay side by side. With a squeal of delight, she threw herself on top of it, marveling at the texture of it. Her bed at home was made of the finest materials and soft as a cloud. She always felt like she was going to sink right through to the floor. Her new bed, while soft and comfortable, had some firmness to it. The rest of the room had a small closet, desk, and a small chest of drawers next to her bed with a lamp sitting on top. She hadn't asked for anything from home save for a few clothes. Her quirk could provide whatever other material objects she could need. And she really didn't want much at all. Perhaps a few decorations, but nothing too outlandish. She had gotten her fill of that in her first 5 years of life. Instead, she hopped up from the bed and moved out into the hall to head to the kitchen. To her delight, the kitchen was fully stocked with food, cookware, and flatware. On one of the shelves, she found multiple cookbooks, giving her the idea of teaching herself how to cook. Having maids under her father's thumb made doing such things at home impossible. The living room section of the dorm was set with 4 large couches with a coffee table between them set in front of a large 75-foot TV. It was all very nice and suited her taste perfectly. The only thing she was starting feeling lacking in was company. "That's your own fault," she reminded herself. "You wanted to get out as soon as you were able, and surely no one else is as eager as I." The front doors suddenly burst open. "Surprise!" shouted a familiar voice that had Momo squealing with excitement. "Did you miss me?" 𝗧𝗵𝗲 asked as the girl ran up and hugged her. "You have no idea." The girl giggled as 𝗧𝗵𝗲's slightly forked tongue darted out and tickled her cheek. "I didn't know you were moving in so soon." 𝗧𝗵𝗲 scoffed. "Are you kidding me?" She stepped back with a huge grin on her face. "My folks are always busy with work, and my siblings are all in college." She reminded the girl, "My house might as well be abandoned." "Well, I'm certainly glad that you're here now," Momo said, feeling a little embarrassed. "I was actually starting to feel just a bit lonely." 𝗧𝗵𝗲 laughed at that. "After everything you told me about your home, I'm not surprised," she said before gesturing to her bags. "Now, how about helping a girl out?" She grinned. "I didn't bring much, but I wouldn't mind some help in unpacking." Momo was only too happy to help. The 2 girls spent the next few hours putting their things away and getting their rooms just how they wanted them. Momo even made decorations with her quirk while 𝗧𝗵𝗲 thumbed through magazines for anything that might suit them. "So," the reptilian girl said while laying on her bed, "did you ever meet up with that green-haired cutie from the exams?" Momo giggled. "No," she said sadly. "I've only ever met him twice, and both times weren't the best of circumstances." 𝗧𝗵𝗲 rolled her eyes. "Oh yeah?" she asked. "What was so bad about it?" "Well," she said with some embarrassment, "the first time was when I was supposed to meet someone else." She frowned in thought, praying that she and 𝗧𝗏 were in separate classes. 𝗧𝗵𝗲, however, took her hesitation in the absolute wrong way. "Oh, do I hear a love triangle forming?" she asked with a suggestive wiggle of her brow. Momo sputtered. "God, no." The girl said, "Honestly, I wouldn't have anything to do with him if our fathers hadn't." She clamped her hand over her mouth. She had said far too much in front of the other girl. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 had caught it, however. "Momo, what's going on?" The girl rolled off the bed and went to her side. "Seriously, you can tell me anything." Momo worried her lip. "Swear that you won't tell anyone?" she asked. She made a show of crossing heart. "Cross my heart," she said. "I won't tell anyone." The heiress then sighed before sitting at the desk. "My father received an offer from Endeavor several months back." 𝗧𝗵𝗲 frowned at her but made no move to stop her, so she continued. "He proposed an arranged marriage with myself and his youngest son, and my father accepted it." "Geez," 𝗧𝗵𝗲 had a slightly disgusted look on her face. "You mean that guy from the recommendation exams?" she asked. "The one with 𝐎𝐻𝑒𝑡erochromia?" Momo nodded. "That's the one." She sighed. "And he's not been subtle in his dislike of me." 𝗧𝗵𝗲 blew a raspberry. "What's to dislike?" She made a gesture at the girl. "You're smart, rich, and to top it all off, you're drop-dead gorgeous." Momo blushed at her comment. Either that guy likes other guys, or he's just plain blind, stupid, or both. Momo thought about all the times she had debated with her father on Shoto's sexual orientation, but she didn't think that the boy was interested in men. "I believe it's most likely because of his father," she said while 𝗧𝗵𝗲 looked at her with a cocked head. "He hates the man." She clarified. "And while I believe Endeavor may have earned that hatred, it now extends to me." "Then why don't you just break things off?" 𝗧𝗵𝗲 asked. "Doesn't your dad want you to be happy?" Momo let out an uncharacteristically harsh laugh. "My father? Wanting me to be happy?" She laughed, finding the very idea hysterical. "No, he doesn't want me to be happy, he wants Endeavor's money." Her laughter continued. "All my life he's ignored me save for a few words in passing, or just to check my progress in my education, and I've been homeschooled for the entirety of my life." 𝗧𝗵𝗲 looked at her with sympathy as she saw tears welling in the girl's eyes. "And when he finally offers to let me attend a public school, no less, it's only because my betrothed is going to the same school." A sob escaped her as her friend came over and wrapped her in a hug. Hey, come on, Setsuna said soothingly. Things will get better. You becoming a hero will give you a chance to get away from all of this. That's what I'm planning, Momo relented. I love my father, but I can't stand him. She shook her head. If I have to go back to that house, I think I'll lose my mind. The girl drew away from her. You're not going back, Setsuna told her fiercely. Not if I have any say in the matter. She said, not only are we going to be the best heroines the school's ever produced, but both my folks are lawyers. Damned good ones, too. So if either Endeavor or your dad try to take you out of here, then they're in for one hell of a rude awakening. 𝐒𝐻𝐸𝐵. Momo and Setsuna were not the only ones arriving to the school earlier than planned. Several students had decided to move into the dorms ahead of the school year, in fact, including those of the sister class across from them. In Class 1A, there were several girls that she and Setsuna were happy to meet and got along with very well. In fact, Setsuna seemed to have met her rival in personality. Mina Ishido, a bright and bubbly girl with a mutation-type quirk that caused her to grow horns, turned her hair and skin pink while her eyes became golden within the irises and black in the sclera. Even by the lizard splitter's standards, she was the friendliest person either of them had ever met. Surprisingly, she arrived with a boy that had gone to her school. Eijiro Kirishima was a friendly sort and seemed to hold manliness in great importance. He also had strikingly red hair done up in horn-like spikes on his head and sharp teeth that were similar to Setsuna's. She couldn't tell what his quirk was at a glance. Then came a girl with an invisibility quirk that made her see through all the time. Toru Hagakure was just as bubbly and friendly as Mina was. The two of them become very quick friends as they gossiped about their previous schools, especially boys. Setsuna eagerly joined them while Momo kept her ears open. Two other girls joined them as a girl with a hybrid mutation quirk that made her frog-like in her appearance in the cutest ways possible, 𝗬𝗎𝐽𝐽. She was a rather blunt person to talk to, as Momo found out when she pointed out that she looked a little tense. But all in all, Momo adored her. Then came a girl that took a shine to her right off the bat. Kyoko was a modest girl, with long jack-like lobes extending from her ears. Her hair was a deep purple and looked to have what looked like an EKG wave. After introducing themselves to each other, they started chatting away about what music they liked. The last girl to join them was a girl named Ochako Yorika. Momo recognized her from the entrance exams as the girl rescued by the three boys. She was a simple girl from the countryside, a bit shy if Momo was to be honest, but she seemed quite strong if the slightly defined muscles on her arms were any indication. Momo was absolutely dreading seeing more boys arrive. However, she was rewarded when she found a young man she knew from some of the parties her father hosted. A young man from a well-known hero family. Tenya Ida of the Ida Speed hero family, younger brother of the current Ingenium. He was just as strict as he had been the first time she had met him years ago. The next to come was a boy with striking blonde hair with lightning bolt-like black highlights in his hair who introduced himself as Denki Kaminari, and Momo may have mistaken it, but she thought that his eyes lingered on Kyoka for a bit longer than was polite. Still, he was polite and friendly toward her and everyone else, so she would reserve judgment for the time being. Next came a boy with rounded elbows and a wide grin, introducing himself as Hantashiro. Apparently, his quirk allowed him to shoot tape from his elbows. He was the friendliest out of the entire group so far. Then came a larger boy with large lips. He was a tad shy when he introduced himself as Rikido Sato. The boy looked like a bodybuilder. Next came a bow with an avian hybrid mutation. Fumikage Tokoyami had the head of a raven, though his quirk was something else entirely, as it was revealed to be a sentient shadow creature that shared his body. He seemed to be the type of person that kept to himself, a fact that was revealed when he went off immediately to his room with a quick greeting. After Tokoyami, another boy with a hybrid mutation that gave him a large prehensile tail entered the building, introducing himself as Masahiro Ojiro. Following him were a multi-armed boy named Mezu Shoji and a quiet, shy giant of a boy calling himself Koji Koda. Momo was keeping an eye out for Shoto still, but she was feeling more and more relieved as their little dorm filled up. There weren't very many spots left. 4 more students needed to arrive before they had a full 20, as was the normal size for a class. Setsuna noticed her nervousness, reached out and took hold of her hand. Momo gave her a grateful look. He's not going to be part of this class, the dinosaur-loving girl said. You and I were both in the recommendation exams, and only 2 students from those are put into each class," she said, and Momo felt the tension in her shoulders ease. Her friend was right. Only 2 students from the recommendation exams were put into each of the first-year class, unless there were special circumstances. Momo was so relieved by the new arrival and Setsuna's assurances that she went into the kitchen and brewed a few pots of tea for them. The teachers must have had good taste in teas because when she searched the cupboards, she found a large variety of Golden Tips Imperial brands, including her favorite. As she was brewing, she heard another student arrive who was greeted by the rest of her classmates, followed by a loud rumble. No, 2 loud rumbles. "That's a Harley-Davidson," she heard Setsuna tell the others. "There's no mistaking that sound when it comes to motors." Curious, the young heiress went to one of the windows to get a look at who had arrived on such a machine. As she had thought, there were 2 of them, one wearing a helmet and the other without. They were both clad in riding jackets, but she couldn't quite see the one without the helmet as the one wearing his was blocking her sight. He then removed the helmet and revealed a familiar head of fluffy ashen blonde hair. Her breath caught in her throat, her thoughts turning to the wild green locks and adorably round face of the boy she had met all those months ago. But there was no possible way that he could be in her class as well, could he? No. Her luck could not be that good. Or could it? The 2 spoke for a moment before becoming distracted by someone approaching them. She heard them both laugh as another face she recognized joined them. It was the boy with pale purple hair that had helped Midoriya aim his optic blast quirk at the zero-pointer robot. His face was split into a huge grin as he greeted the 2 new arrivals. "Maybe it is him," she thought hopefully. "I doubt that boy would be so friendly with anyone else." Before she could get a look at his face, the 3 boys started for the door. "Momo?" Setsuna's voice startled her away from the window, like a child caught with their hand in the cookie jar. The girl looked at her in surprise, then a knowing grin appeared on her face. "Is it him?" Momo worried her lip. I think it might be." Her cheeks were now flushed with color. "I didn't get to see his face," she mumbled embarrassedly. Setsuna rolled her eyes. "Well, come on then." She gestured to the tea trays that Momo had prepared. What better way to greet them than with a fresh brewed cup of tea? She grabbed up one of the trays, gesturing for Momo to follow behind her. "Don't be nervous, okay?" Momo nodded and picked up the other tray. "I hope I don't make a fool out of myself," she muttered more to herself than to Setsuna. But the girl's hearing picked it up anyway. "Don't worry," she said reassuringly. "If something happens, I'll take care of it." The heiress wondered briefly how her friend would achieve that when there came a startled yelp from the common room. The 2 girls hurried back to see what was wrong, only to find Ochako gushing over the new arrivals. 2 of them being Katsuki Bakugo, who Ochako was talking to animatedly, somewhere between being grateful to being embarrassed about their last encounter, and Hitoshi Shinso. The violet-haired teen seemed to be talking with Ida about something while the person standing behind them was acting nervous. "Look, Ida, was it?" Shinso said to the blue-haired speedster. "Midoriya's not wearing those shades because he wants to." Her heart leapt up into her throat when she heard that name. "He wears them to keep his quirk in check." Momo thought. Ida must have thought wearing sunglasses inside was his idea of being rude. She sighed in exasperation as she stepped around the couches and set her tray down on the coffee table. "He's always been one for proper manners. Unless you want him blowing the roof off of this place," Bakugo said to the strict teen, "then you'd better leave his shades alone." A small crackling came from his palms. "And then you'll have me to deal with," he said menacingly. Setsuna set her tray next to Momo's. "Wow, overprotective much?" she whispered to her friend as they both got a look at the boy that Momo was so strung up about. He's even cuter in person," she elbowed Momo in the ribs suggestively. "No wonder you took a shine to him." "Sure." Momo hushed her discreetly through the side of her mouth. Izuku was indeed quite nice to look at, Momo readily admitted, so as she has once had the pleasure of seeing him with his shirt off while training at the beach. But he certainly didn't have that Adonis flair that some professional male models, or heroes for that matter, had. The glasses he wore honestly took away from his features greatly. She liked the little diamond-patterned freckles below his eyes, and she liked his round, childish face. But the glasses wouldn't let her see just what color his eyes were beneath them. "He's right, Ida," Ochako said in the boy's defense. "You saw what he could do during the entrance exams when he trashed that giant robot." So you put a finger to her lips? How did he do that? She asked with a frog-like croak. No offense, Midoriya, but you don't seem to have a strength quirk. Izuku just chuckled at that, used to such claims. My quirk is called Optic Blast, he explained, pointed to his eyes. My body absorbs solar radiation and stores it, and my eyes are the release point. He said, when Mr. Powerloader measured the energy that my quirk releases out, he said it was around 2 gigawatts. That got a lot of attention as he was suddenly bombarded with questions. Momo saw that he chanced to greet him had literally slipped through her fingers, so she decided not to dwell on it and offered tea to her classmates. Meanwhile, as the students were getting to know one another, one of them stood away from the rest with his tea. Yuga Aoyama was observing the students closely, his eyes on Midoriya in particular. His quirk is similar to my own, he thought to himself. Could my benefactor have something to do with it? Aoyama? Momo asked as she came up to him with a sweet smile on her face. Is the tea to your liking? She asked. Yuga offered her his most dazzling smile. C'est très bien, mademoiselle, he said, toasting her with his cup. Golden Tips is one of my papa's favorites. Wonderful, Momo smiled happily. If you don't mind me asking, how is it that you have a Japanese name yet speak such fluent French? She asked, hoping she didn't sound rude to the boy. My grandfather immigrated to France when he was young, and married there, Yuga explained. I'm only a quarter Japanese on my father's side. Momo nodded in understanding. I see. That explains quite a bit, she said before moving off toward the hall. I'm going to see if Tokoimi would like some tea. 𝐒𝐻𝐸𝐵. When evening arrived, Lunch Rush was kind enough to deliver a small banquet to the new arrivals. Normally, Izuku would have lost his mind over meeting a hero he admired, but his mind had been preoccupied by something else. Or rather someone else. Later, when he putting his things away in his room, his face utterly exploded with heat. She's here, he muttered to himself. I can't believe she's really here. And we're in the same class. His chest was tight as he thought about the beautiful girl he had met all those months ago, and been just barely brave enough to bring flowers to her when she was in the hospital. All the teasing he had endured from his mother worth it now. I wonder if she remembers me? He thought to himself, shaking his head a moment later. Probably not, I'm pretty plain looking. He muttered as he fell back onto his bed. Besides, she probably wouldn't like me even if she did remember me. He clenched his fists out in front of him. The guy trying to be a hero who can't even control his quirk. Real attractive, Izuku, and now you're talking to yourself like a weirdo. He smacked himself in the face. Great? Keep acting like that, and she'll never talk to you. He looked up and saw Katsuki and Hitoshi Shinso standing in the door. Izuku groaned. You ever hear of knocking, Kaken? The blonde just shrugged. It was open, dummy, he grinned, letting himself in and plopping down on the bed. So Lil Deca's got the hots for someone? If this is the part where you give me relationship advice, please don't, Izuku moaned. I'd rather not puke all over my nice new floor. Hitoshi chuckled. Quite the dynamic you guys have. He closed the door and sat himself at the desk. So who's caught your eye, Midoriya? He asked, curious as he thought that their class was full of attractive girls. That'd be Momo Yorozu, Katsuki supplied, making the boy wince. What, you heard of her or something? Hitoshi shrugged. Her personally no, he said, but her family damned right I have, he went on. The Yaoyorozus have been a huge name in the business world for about 100 years or so. Izuku sat up, looking surprised himself. They used to be big into medical advancement and support gear production, but lately with the current head, I've heard some really shady stuff about him. What about Momo? Izuku asked, eager for anything he could learn about her. Again the boy shrugged. I didn't even know he had any children since his wife passed away, he said. It was all over the news for a few days. Hitoshi thought for a moment. I think I saw her in some social media pages a few times, he said. They were taken down years ago. But she looked a lot like Momo, or Momo looks a lot like her mom, I guess. Katsuki frowned. She sounds like troubled Deku, the blonde commented to his friend. Might want to set your sights on someone else. Izuku frowned. I don't think it works like that, Kaken, he pointed out. And this is why your dating advice sucks. Hitoshi laughed while Katsuki exploded at the teen. The first year of high school was looking more and more interesting.